My family faked my illness to collect sympathy money. So I showed up at their charity gala and told the truth. They told the world I was dying. But the truth was far crueler. I was never sick, a prisoner in my own body, drugged by lies and praised as their brave little fighter, while they smiled for the cameras and cashed in on my pain. I was just the easiest one to silence. If you've ever been silenced, then hit that like and subscribe to know my journey of betrayal and revenge. I'm Aria, and I've spent the better part of my teenage life trapped in a story someone else wrote for me. One of wheelchairs, hospital gowns, whispered prayers, and GoFundMe campaigns. But this isn't a tale of survival. This is a story about revenge. A story about what happens when a forgotten daughter claws her way back into the light, just in time to watch the liars burn under the spotlight they built for themselves. If you're wondering how this all began, let me take you back to where it started. I was 15 when my mother sat me down, tears already swelling in her eyes like clockwork. She told me I had a rare autoimmune condition, life-threatening, terminal. I remember her gripping my hand too tightly, as if she needed my fear more than I did. My father stood by the doorway, silent and grim, a printed medical report clutched in his hands. I didn't question them. Why would I? They were my family. What followed was a life of phantom symptoms, medications that made me dizzy, diet restrictions, missed school days, people telling me how brave I was while I stared at their pitying faces, wondering why I didn't feel broken enough to deserve their sympathy. It wasn't until years later, scrolling through old tagged posts on my cousin's account, that I saw a photo of my mother, drinking champagne, smiling with fake humility at a lavish charity gala, standing next to a banner that read, "Help us save Aria." They raised $500,000 that night, and I wasn't even invited. That night, something inside me cracked. No, snapped. I had spent years in the shadows, shivering under blankets I didn't need, swallowing pills I didn't understand. But it all made sense now. I wasn't their patient. I was their investment. They faked my illness, not to save me, to profit off me. I started digging, quietly, carefully. Every doctor's note, every so-called lab result had one thing in common. My mother had full access to edit or submit them. The so-called specialists I had seen were either vague or conveniently unavailable. One of the prescriptions they insisted I take turned out to be nothing more than high-dose antihistamines, just enough to make me sleepy, to make me compliant. And I had been, for far too long. The final straw was the day I found out about the second house, a lakefront property bought entirely with donation money. On paper, it was registered under a fake nonprofit name. In reality, it was their summer escape, complete with a yacht they called the Fighter. The irony made me sick, but I didn't cry, not anymore. I spent the next year crafting my revenge. No screaming matches, no confrontation, just silence and strategy. I contacted a real investigative journalist, an old friend of my late aunt, who had always suspected something off about my parents' story. I gave her every document, every recording, every text. Then I waited, and when the invitation arrived, the one I was never supposed to receive, everything fell into place. The 10th annual Aria Grace Foundation Gala, held at the city's finest hotel. Black tie only, cameras expected. They were going to raise another $1 million in my name. But this time, the truth would be the guest of honor, because I didn't survive a disease. I survived my family, and now it's their turn to learn what real pain feels like. They called it the most inspiring night of the year. To me, it was the stage where I'd pull the curtain on a decade-long deception. and shatter my family's kingdom of lies in front of flashing cameras and fake smiles. The gala was held at the Hilton Grand Atrium downtown, a ballroom that sparkled like something out of a dream. Crystal chandeliers, white roses lining the gold-trimmed walls, the scent of money and manipulation thick in the air. Everyone who mattered in the city was there. Local news anchors, politicians, influencers with captions ready to go. Number sign Save Aria. Fighter forever. Hope has a name. I arrived in silence. No red carpet, no family welcome. Just me, in a fitted black gown I bought with my own money, hair slicked back, eyes like fire beneath mascara. I wasn't the weak little girl on their posters anymore. I was the reckoning they never saw coming. I stood near the back, unnoticed. My family was too busy basking in their own spotlight. My mother, in an emerald gown she never earned. My father, raising a champagne glass to a lie. My older brother Dylan even gave a speech about what it meant to almost lose a sister. I watched them cry on command, tears as fake as the illness they branded me with. The journalist I'd partnered with, Andrea Lee, was already seated at table 7, disguised as a donor. She nodded at me once. That was our signal. The USB was ready. The footage had been compiled. Emails, records, fake diagnoses, interviews with real doctors exposing everything. The local news station had agreed to air it live at 9 p.m., timed perfectly with the charity's video montage, the one where I was supposed to appear as their brave miracle. Oh, I'd appear all right, just not the way they expected. I slipped backstage and found the AV booth. The technician, who had been paid generously under the table by Andrea, slid the reel file into the program queue. The charity's assistant walked past me, confused. "You're not supposed to be back here. Are you a volunteer?" I smiled sweetly. "Number, I'm the girl you're all pretending is dying." Her face paled. It was nearly showtime. I stepped quietly onto the side of the stage, behind the curtain, just as the lights dimmed and the gala's host took the mic. "Tonight, we celebrate 10 years of bravery, of fighting against the odds, of Aria Grace's courage, and the love of the family that never gave up on her." My parents stood proudly, hands over hearts. The screen behind them flickered to life, but it wasn't the slideshow they expected. It opened with a soundbite of my mother. "Just say she needs the medication. Nobody will question it." Followed by another of my father. "No one's going to track a nonprofit. It's clean. It's easy money." Gasps spread like wildfire across the room. Cameras turned. Glasses clinked to the floor. My brother looked like he'd seen a ghost. My mother tried to unplug the screen, but it was too late. Video after video rolled through. Fraudulent GoFundMe transfers, footage of their second home, me standing alone in empty hospitals, and then I stepped out. My heels echoed like thunder against the marble stage. My voice, amplified, steady as steel. "My name is Aria Grace, and I'm not dying. I never was. But my childhood did die, at the hands of the people you just applauded." Silence. I was used as a symbol, a story, a cash machine. My illness was fabricated, my symptoms forced. And while you donated your hard-earned money thinking you were saving a child, you were funding their vacations, their luxury cars, their lies. The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in outrage. One woman stood and shouted, "I gave you $10,000. A man from the press whispered, "We've been scammed." The board members of the foundation stood frozen. A security guard moved toward me, but the cameras were rolling. Any wrong move now would only make it worse for them. My parents, stood speechless. My mother's hands trembled. My father opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time in my life, they had no script to hide behind. The host tried to salvage the moment. Perhaps we should pause for clarification. No, I cut in. What you need is investigation. I've submitted everything to the Attorney General's office. The media has the evidence. And tonight, you were all part of their final act. With that, I walked off stage. Not limping, not frail, not broken, but with the poise of a woman who had burned her cage and walked free through the ashes. The morning after the gala wasn't on, it was detonation. My phone buzzed nonstop. I didn't need to open the news apps to know what they were saying. The headlines painted it clear as crystal. Charity fraud exposed. Girl declared terminal, reveals family hoax, live on stage. Grave lies. Parents fake daughter's illness for 10 years. Millions raised. All spent, the world knew now. But my battle wasn't over. No, it had only just begun. I stayed in a quiet hotel outside the city, not wanting to return to the apartment I used to call home. That place reeked of pity and performance. My real home had been gone for years, buried under fake hospital bracelets, false hope, and the chains of forced weakness. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. No 4 lines, no pale cheeks, just a woman with truth in her spine and a fire no one could stage. My lawyer, David, called just after 8 a.m. They've frozen the charity's account. Authorities want to speak to you today. Are you ready? Was I ready? I had spent my whole life being anything but myself. So yes, I was ready to finally stand as Aria Grace, the woman who outlived the lie they tried to cage her in. At the station, I gave my full testimony. Everything from the made-up diagnoses to the forged prescriptions. The injections my mother insisted I needed. The staged photos in wheelchairs for updates to donors. The endless forced bed rest while my family basked in praise. I wasn't sick, I told the officer. I was silenced. He nodded slowly. And now you're speaking loud enough for the world to hear. That afternoon, my father was arrested. Cameras caught him being led out of his office in handcuffs, jaw clenched, eyes hollow. My mother's mugshot surfaced hours later. Mascara streaks and entitlement stripped away. Dylan, he vanished from social media. All his influencer dreams collapsed like a card tower built on fraud. But what they didn't know was I had more. This wasn't just about public shame or legal justice. This was about emotional debt, about the childhood I was robbed of, about the girl who sat by the window watching other kids run, while she was told she needed to conserve her strength so that her family could gather another round of donations. I went back to our old house. It was empty now. Yellow tape stretched across the entrance. But the ghosts still lived there. I walked through the halls slowly, like a visitor in a museum built on grief. My old bedroom was still painted pastel blue, the same hospital bed, the same stuffed animal they made me hold during photo shoots. I sat on the edge of that bed, and I wept, not for them, but for me, for the years stolen under the name of love. For the time I was taught to be grateful for my captors. For every time I doubted my own reality, because they said, "Don't make a scene, Aria. You're not well enough." I was never sick. But they were. They were sick with greed, contaminated by attention, poisoned by their desire to be seen as saints, while I suffered in silence. That night, I received a call from a talk show producer. "Aria, we saw what you did at the gala. The world needs your voice. Will you come share your story on national television?" My hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, from power. "Yes," I whispered. "I think it's time people hear the real story." The next week, I sat under bright lights with millions watching. I told them about the girl who was told to fake pain, who was filmed crying for the camera, who was never allowed to run, laugh, or even live. The host leaned forward. What would you say to your family now? I looked straight at the lens. You taught me how to lie, but I taught myself how to survive. You built a house of cards with my life, and I burned it down one truth at a time. The audience fell silent, then erupted in applause. That applause wasn't for the character they once pitied. It was for the woman who took her pain and turned it into power. The charity was dismantled. Lawsuits piled up. Donations were ordered to be returned. But no amount of settlement could undo the past. Still, for the first time in my life, I had the final word, and it was not whispered in hospital rooms. It was broadcasted, sharp, true, unapologetic. This was no longer their story. It was mine, and I was just getting started. They say time heals all wounds. But what if the wounds were never physical? What if they were stitched into your identity, sewn into your sense of self, with a thread of lies? That week after the broadcast felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. I walked down the street and people recognized me, not as the fragile terminal girl from old charity posters, but as the woman who stood up and shattered the illusion. Some offered support. Others whispered behind my back, unsure if I was the villain or the victim. But none of it compared to the silence I got from my own blood. My uncle didn't call. My godparents unfollowed me online. Cousins who once cried beside me at hospital visits sent texts like, "You've gone too far, Arya." Too far? I wanted to scream. Was truth now considered rebellion? Was survival now betrayal? One afternoon, I received a private message on social media from someone I didn't recognize. The name read, Hope's Light Foundation Volunteer. The message said, "You don't know me, but I worked backstage at your family's events. I always had a feeling something was off. I'm so sorry you went through that. And I have something you might want to see." Attached was a drive link. My heart pounded as I clicked. It opened to dozens of photos and clips, unedited footage from past galas, videos of my mother rehearsing tearful speeches, my father smiling as he deposited checks into the charity account, even a chilling clip of them instructing a photographer, "Make sure the lighting hits Arya just right, pale, weak. It sells better." I felt sick. I had already known the truth, but seeing it, watching them orchestrate my suffering like a stage play, was like reliving every betrayal in high definition. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood in front of the mirror again and stared deep into my own eyes. The girl I used to be, the one curled up in bed, spoon-fed pity, was gone. In her place stood a woman sculpted by fire and fury. I began organizing everything: screenshots, footage, bank statements, old prescription labels. My lawyer, David, helped me piece together a timeline. I didn't want just attention anymore. I wanted justice. And more than that, I wanted answers. So I requested to visit my mother in jail. David tried to dissuade me. "You don't owe them a thing, Arya." "I know," I said, "but I need to look her in the eyes when I tell her I remember everything." The prison was cold and clinical, the kind of place where time hung heavy in the air. She was led in, wearing the same smug expression she used to give reporters. Only this time, the makeup was gone. The mask was cracked. She sat across from me. No greeting, no apology, just silence, until she broke it. "You always were too dramatic," she said. I blinked. "You turned my life into a charity campaign." She shrugged. "We were trying to help you. We gave you a purpose." "No," I snapped. "You gave me a performance. You built your legacy out of my supposed pain. You paraded me like a martyr, then locked me away when I wasn't marketable enough." Her face didn't twitch. "And yet here you are, famous, admired. Would you have had that without us? My breath caught. The audacity. The sheer delusion. You're right, I whispered. Without you, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have had to rebuild my life from ashes. I wouldn't have learned how to fight for the truth while you feasted on lies. I stood. But I'll make sure the world knows exactly who you are. Not the grieving mother, not the selfless caretaker, but the architect of the biggest emotional con I've ever seen. She finally looked shaken. Good. When I left the prison, the sky opened with rain. Not soft drizzle, but a storm, the kind that made people run for shelter. I walked through it anyway. Every drop felt like it was washing off the years I spent being their puppet. That night, I posted the uncut footage online. I titled it, "This is what fraud looks like in a family portrait." It went viral in under an hour. People cried. People cursed. People rallied behind me. But more importantly, people believed me. And for the first time, I wasn't being pitied. I was being heard. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was reclamation. Truth, once set free, doesn't simply whisper through the cracks. It roars. And that roar came like a tidal wave after I posted the uncut footage. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, news anchors were dissecting every frame. Influencers, celebrities, medical professionals, everyone had an opinion. But one thing was clear. The illusion had shattered. My phone became a battlefield of sympathy, outrage, and stunned silence. And yet, not a single word from him. Not from Dylan. Not from the brother who held my hand through the IV lines. The one who spoon-fed me ice chips during staged hospital visits, promising things would get better. I'd waited for him to reach out. I told myself he was just a kid too, that maybe he was manipulated. But silence became its own answer, a coward's refuge, until I found him. He was scheduled to speak at a leadership conference, still riding the wave of his polished public persona. I bought a ticket and sat in the front row, arms folded, eyes unblinking. He walked onto the stage with that same easy charm he inherited from our father. Dimples, tailored suit, tone of empathy dipped in perfection. "My sister," he began, voice thick with false grief, "was the bravest person I knew growing up. She fought so much. I saw her struggle daily, and I see that strength in myself." Applause. I stood up, right there, right in the middle of his sentence. "Stop." My voice sliced through the air like a blade. "You saw me struggle because you helped fake the illness." Gasps rippled across the room. Cameras turned. Dylan froze. "Aria?" I walked up the steps without hesitation and grabbed a nearby mic. "You watched them inject fear into my life. You sat by while they exploited my name, my body, my image. You're not a witness to bravery, Dylan. You're a co-conspirator in my erasure." Security moved toward me. The audience didn't know whether to cheer or cringe. Dylan's face turned pale. "You don't know what you're doing." "Oh, I do," I said, narrowing my eyes. "For years, you let them keep me quiet. You helped carry out the lie. You had choices. You had a voice. And you chose comfort." The room fell into a hush, only broken by the rustling of uneasy breaths. "I may have been the sick girl in your fairy tale," I added, "but now I'm writing the ending." Security didn't dare touch me. Not after the world had seen the video. I dropped the mic at his feet and walked out with my head high. By nightfall, hashtags had emerged. Justice for Area, sympathy scam, false family. The backlash intensified. The foundation was stripped of its nonprofit status. Sponsors pulled out. Donations were frozen. Investigations deepened. And then, the final piece cracked. A former accountant for the charity came forward, anonymously, confirming that over $2.3 million in funds had been rerouted into personal bank accounts, including Dylan's. That's when my brother finally called. The screen flashed his name, and for a brief second, the old version of me, the girl desperate for connection, for familial warmth, almost wanted to answer with grace. But I didn't. I picked up, waited a beat, and said, "You only call when you're drowning, Dylan. I'm not your lifeboat anymore." "You don't understand," he pleaded. "I didn't know it would go this far. You knew enough to cash the checks." I snapped. "You knew when you bought that apartment overlooking Central Park, while I was locked in a dark room, isolated, lied to about my health. I was a kid," he choked. "And now you're a man, so own it." He tried to apologize, his words tangled with excuses and self-pity. But I ended the call. No more rewrites, no more forgiveness born from guilt. My story wasn't his escape route. That night, I walked through Times Square. My face had made it onto one of the digital billboards, an interview clip where I said, "You can survive sickness, but surviving betrayal, that takes war." People waved. Some asked for selfies, and I smiled. But inside me, a quiet fire burned, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration, about claiming my name, not as their lie, but as my truth. I wasn't a victim, I was a mirror. And now, my family had no choice but to see their reflection in the shards of what they'd broken. There's a different kind of silence inside a courtroom. It doesn't comfort, it pressurizes. The kind that makes every breath feel like a confession, and every glance feel like a verdict. And on the day my family stood trial for the fraud they committed in my name, I didn't sit quietly in the back. I sat in the front row, back straight, chin high, unapologetic. They entered one by one. My father, Charles, the master puppeteer who orchestrated my illness for 10 years to keep those donation checks flowing. My mother, Evelyn, the perfect actress who wept on TV, begging the world for prayers while she counted the money behind closed doors. And Dylan, my brother, who knew, stayed silent, and profited, all dressed in black, like grief made flesh. But this time, there was no camera crew to cue the tears. Only a judge, a jury, and me. The prosecutor called me to the stand first. "Please state your name." "Aria Morgan." "Can you confirm you were diagnosed with a terminal illness as a child?" I inhaled sharply. "Number, I can confirm I was told I had one. I was never sick, just silenced." There was a collective gasp. One juror even blinked twice. Stunned, I continued. "My parents convinced me that I had a rare neurological disorder. They staged seizures, gave me pills that were never verified by any hospital, told my teachers I couldn't participate in physical education or school trips or even make friends." The prosecutor held up copies of interviews, televised fundraisers, even gala invitations bearing my name and face. These were all part of a fraudulent campaign. Yes, I became a brand, a tragedy wrapped in lace. "Did you receive any financial compensation from the Morgan Hope Foundation?" I almost laughed. Compensation. I wasn't allowed to touch my own birthday cards. They made me believe that joy was a sin and hope was a debt I owed. Evelyn broke down in tears behind me. Crocodile tears. I didn't turn around. "And your brother?" I paused, looked straight at Dylan. My brother was the only one who had access to my medical journal. He knew what was real. He lied to my face. Every single day. The courtroom sat heavy with stillness as the evidence was laid bare. Wire transfers, secret accounts, a document trail that bled guilt in black and white. But the moment that shattered everything came when the prosecution played the audio I'd recorded years ago. A conversation between my parents, unaware I had hidden a recorder in my teddy bear. "She'll never know. my father said. As long as she takes the pills and stays weak, we keep the money coming. She's the perfect child for this, my mother replied. She trusts us too much. The gallery recoiled. A woman near the back gasped audibly. The judge's gavel slammed down to maintain order. Dylan bowed his head. My mother stopped crying. My father's mask finally cracked. But the most haunting part? I felt nothing, because feeling is a privilege they'd stolen from me long ago. When it was their turn to testify, the performance began again. Charles called it a desperate act of survival for a struggling family. Evelyn claimed postpartum depression twisted her judgment. Dylan said he didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. The jury didn't buy it. Neither did the nation watching. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts: fraud, exploitation, emotional abuse, misappropriation of nonprofit funds, and a final charge added by the judge himself: dehumanization of a minor for personal gain. My parents were sentenced to a combined 30 years in federal prison. Dylan, though given a reduced sentence for cooperation and returning funds, was banned from ever serving on any nonprofit, academic, or financial institution board again. But their real punishment wasn't prison. It was exposure. They had built a world upon a lie, and now that lie was ash in their mouths, burnt beyond repair, broadcast to millions. Outside the courtroom, press flooded the steps. They expected tears, maybe even vengeance, in my words. Instead, I said this: my family didn't just fake my illness. They robbed me of reality, but I survived the lie. And now, I live for the truth. That quote headlined almost every outlet by morning. That night, I returned home, not the one they raised me in, but the apartment I bought with my own money, earned from a documentary deal and book rights. My story was mine now. Every page, every scar, every breath. RSM. As I lit a candle and sat beside the window, a single thought came to me. They wrote me into tragedy, but I rewrote myself into a revolution. They say the truth will set you free, but no one warns you how heavy that freedom feels at first. My parents were in prison. The world now knew my name, not as a sob story, but as a survivor. Yet, even with their verdict behind me and justice served, my soul felt suspended, not in pain, not in peace, but in that silent space where healing begins its first whisper. Until the night of the Morgan Hope Foundation annual gala, now rebranded under new leadership and repurposed to support real victims of medical fraud. It was the very stage they used for years to parade me around as a tragic symbol. And now, it was the same place where I'd reclaim every lie they built with my name. I wasn't invited as a guest. I was invited as the keynote speaker. As I stood behind the velvet curtain, I could feel the spotlight cutting through the fabric, waiting to catch me in its glow. The ballroom pulsed with energy. Donors, activists, press, all eager for a redemption narrative. But I wasn't here to give them comfort. I was here to deliver consequences and clarity. The MC's voice echoed across the room. And now, the voice behind the truth. Aria Morgan. I walked out, each step echoing with the ghosts of my past performances, the ones where I pretended to be dying to keep my family's pockets full. But tonight, I wasn't acting. I was alive in every sense of the word. I took the mic, exhaled, and began. Good evening. I'm not here to entertain pity. I'm not here to make you feel better about your donations. I'm here to tell you what happens when family becomes a cage and trust becomes currency. The room went still. No forks clinked against plates, no side conversations, just truth, raw and burning. I was made sick not by a disease, but by deceit. My body was healthy, my mind manipulated, My childhood taken, not by a tragedy of nature, but by the hands of those who called me daughter. I paused. And yet, I am still here. I told them everything, not to vilify, but to validate. The signs I ignored, the pills that did nothing, the birthdays spent in hospital gowns for show, the loss of self that came from being everyone's inspiration, but no one's priority. I was a brand, a performance, a fundraising tool, but now I am something far more dangerous to liars. I am the truth they never planned for. Tears welled in some eyes, but I wasn't crying. I had done enough of that behind closed doors. Tonight, I was flame, not water. I ended with this. My family buried me under the weight of their lies, but they forgot one thing. I am not soil. I am seed. And now, I grow louder. A full standing ovation thundered through the room. But I wasn't finished yet. When I stepped down, the new foundation director handed me an envelope. Inside was a check, my honorarium for speaking, a 5-figure sum. I looked at it and said, double it, and give it to the hospital's child psychology department. They're the ones picking up the pieces when kids like me survive people like them. That was the moment I realized. Revenge doesn't always scream. Sometimes it speaks with composure, with decision, with legacy. Weeks passed, and the documentary launched. The Girl They Invented, the Aria Morgan story. Within hours, it went viral, not just because it was tragic, but because it was powerful, because it wasn't about falling, it was about rising in the face of betrayal. And then came the morning show interviews, the TED Talk invitation, and most meaningfully, the handwritten letters from other survivors who had once been silenced by their own families. I read every single one. One girl wrote, I thought I was crazy for suspecting my parents were lying about my illness. After hearing you, I know I'm not alone. You saved me. That line broke me open in the best way. That's when I knew. This isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of a revolution. I now run my own organization, Reclaim Truth, dedicated to giving voice and legal resources to young people used as props in fraudulent schemes. We've helped expose 7 fake charities so far. I speak at schools. I sit on advocacy panels. I no longer flinch when someone says my name, because now I own it. The final revenge wasn't prison. It was this, that the girl they tried to erase with lies is now the woman being written into history, on her own terms. And every time I take a stage, stand on a podium, or sign a book, I remember this truth. They forged a story of sickness to sell sympathy, but I reclaimed that story to sell hope. Some lies are spoken for money. Others are whispered in hallways of shame. But when your own blood paints your face with fraud, there comes a day when silence becomes your loudest weapon. I wasn't their broken daughter. I was their unfinished consequence. And now, I write the ending they never saw coming.